that's going to happen. But for now, we are about to start the live portion. So again, if you have any concerns about privacy, we just encourage you to turn your camera off for this portion, and we'll let you know when that is over. So thanks very much. And just give it a moment, Mac, and I'll turn it over to you, Mac Burnham, in just a second. Let me get the broadcast started and I'll let you know.
Okay, thank you.
Looks like we are going live. Okay, great. Take it away, Mac. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Mac Burnham from Epilepsy. I'd like to welcome everyone to the second Power of Purple webinar. These webinars have been organized by Epilepsy Toronto and by EPLINC, the Epilepsy Research Program of the Ontario Brain Institute. Today, we're going to be hearing about memory issues and epilepsy. I've talked to Don Weaver, a neurologist I think some of you may know, and Don says that when he talks to his patients about their problems, they often say memory problems are more troubling to them than the actual seizures they're living with. So we'll be hearing about memory issues in epilepsy today. Our speakers will be Mary Pat McAndrews and Wendy Morris. As Mackenzie just said earlier, after these talks, we'll have a question and answer session. People are invited to submit questions into the Zoom chat box, or if you're watching on Facebook Live, you can submit questions into the comments section. As mentioned before, if you're attending through Zoom, there's also going to be a chance to discuss the topics further in breakout group sessions. Okay, with that, I'd like to introduce our first presenter, Dr. Mary Pat McAndrews. She joins us from the Toronto Western Hospital, where she works as a neuropsychologist. She's also a professor of psychology at the University of Toronto and a co-director of EPLINC. And it is my pleasure to work with her as a co-director of EPLINC. Mary Pat, take it away.
Okay, thanks very much, Mac. Let me just make sure I can share my screen here. And apologies at the beginning if one of my cats seems to think that it's really his time rather than ours. So that's not the right screen. Sorry about that. Just a sec, sorry. I'm not getting, oh dear, sorry about this.
Mary Pat, if you go to your slideshow at the top, it should give you the option to view. Yeah, there you go.
Got it. There we go. Thank you so much.
No problem.
All righty. So clearly this was not titled People with Competency in Computers and Epilepsy. So, but I do know a little bit more about memory than I do about Zoom. So hopefully I can share some of that with you. As Matt said, I'm a clinical neuropsychologist, and so I deal with problems that people are telling me about memory, and particularly in the epilepsy surgery program, where we look at individuals before surgery and after surgery to try and make some determinations about what are risks to memory function. And I'm also a scientist, so we do a lot of research that we hope will inform the next patient that we see, so that we're always trying to kind of be in a learning situation. So hopefully I can share a little bit of those learnings with you today. Okay, so people come in to my office and the first thing they say is, my memory is absolutely awful. Why is that? Is it because I have seizures and that's causing memory problems? Is it the underlying brain abnormality that's causing the seizures? Is it the medications that I'm taking? Is it other cognitive factors like I have poor attention, or maybe my thinking rate is too slow? Is it because my mood is low, so I can't really engage that much? And is it in fact because I've stepped back from my everyday challenges, so I'm kind of losing my edge? And the answer to those questions is yes, all of the above are actually things that can influence memory function, and that probably do influence memory function in individuals living with epilepsy. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a primer in how we think about memory. I'm not going to make you neuropsychologists, but hopefully just to be able to talk about it sensibly and the kinds of ways in which we clinically assess memory. Okay, so we think about memory as kind of three processes or stages. The first we call encoding, and that's the ability to take new information and form a kind of lasting representation or memory trace in your brain. And the second we think of as an active process called storage or consolidation, that in fact this helps us to preserve and in some senses transform those memory traces over time. And then the third process is retrieval, and that's getting the information out once it's been in there, either on demand or it will automatically spring to mind. And of course, any of these three processes can be affected by all of those things we talked about in terms of medications or seizures or underlying brain dysfunction. And I'm also going to say that we talk about two different types of memory in general. And again, just to give you a flavor of that, one of them we talk about is called semantic memory. And what we mean by that is kind of memory of facts, words, names, concepts, things that are common knowledge about the world. And we know from a lot of research that in fact, this area of the brain, the temporal lobe, the anterior part of the temporal lobe, is actually very important for semantic memory. And especially when we're thinking about names, it's the left side of the brain. So that's one kind of memory that can be affected. And I'm just going to give you a little kind of example of what that might look like. So for example, if I ask you which of these two words at the bottom, spider or bee, goes best with the word web, which makes most sense, you kind of have to think about the world and say, it's probably spider, because spiders build webs and bees don't necessarily. Or if you think about the city of Paris, what would be the most likely kind of food that you'd be eating there? Would it be sushi or croissant? And again, for most of us, we might pick croissant because that's kind of part of our semantic memory, our knowledge about what's in Paris, right? So that's one thing that could be affected by epilepsy. The other that people think of more traditionally as memory is what we call episodic memory, or you could think memory for episodes or life experiences. And in this case, these are unique to the individual. You have your own episodic memories, and they're different to the ones that I might have. And some kinds of examples could be things like the first day of school or your wedding day, big events in life. But also if I asked you, about your lunch that you had last week with your friend, what you ate, where you went, or even if you fall into the clutches of a neuropsychologist, I might ask you about words that you just saw on a list that I provided for you. And here again, there's an area deeper inside the temporal lobe, medial temporal lobe structures. Often we talk about this structure called the hippocampus, which has the distinction of being very highly epileptogenic. So it is a site for seizures that are hard to control, but also an area of the brain that's very important for memory. You have one on each side, and typically individuals with unilateral temporal lobe epilepsy will have problems with one of those two. So again, let's take a little example here. So a minute or so ago, I showed you the word web and asked you about two words, which one went best with it. Here, I'm not going to ask you that same question. I'm going to say, did I show you the word wasp or the word bee with it? I only showed you one of those two words, not both of them. So you have to remember back to that particular instance and decide, oh, actually, I do remember it was the word bee, not the word wasp. And similarly for Paris, did you see the word sushi or the word ramen with it? And again, if your memory is working well, your episodic memory is working well, you'll remember it was the word sushi. So these are some of the kinds of ways that we test memory in the clinic. We give you kind of artificial kinds of stimuli and see how you're going to be able to do on these kinds of tests. And we compare your abilities against other people, generally of your same age and background, so that we can say, oh, is there a particular problem that we're seeing in one of these types of memories? But in real everyday world, in fact, you're not running around trying to, do arbitrary lists of words, but rather what are we trying to understand better, or what do we think these things reflect? they might reflect this idea of a loss of episodic detail in our everyday memory experiences, the kind of detail that allows us to think back on a situation from our own lives and kind of relive it in all its glory. And for example, if I give somebody a cue, like tell me about a family dinner, and they have an intact brain without any trouble in this region of brain, they might be able to bring to mind that time when cousin Bob was fighting with Uncle Phil and remember all of the people in the background and what was happening during that family dinner, all in glorious detail, and be able to tell me about it. But if I ask the same thing of an individual who has damage in this medial temporal lobe with the same kind of cue, they may be able to come back with the general gist of what happened, maybe who was there, but they might forget some of the more important kinds of details and not be able to flesh it out in real life. And for example, and interestingly, this is a kind of problem that people were coming to us in the clinic with that 20 years ago, there really wasn't any research on, that we started to do research on to understand that, in fact, this is something that is really quite pervasive in individuals who have some damage in this temporal lobe. So it seems to be a very kind of important way of understanding what's happening in terms of people's everyday walking around memory. But one thing to be cognizant of, or that's really important for us to understand, is there's tons of variability in these effects. Some people might show up and have no problem in any of our tests. Some people will show up and have a tremendous amount of trouble in the tests. And we have to understand what are the factors that might underlie some of that variability. And some of them we've been able to identify for very many years through our neuropsychological testing. So things like the age of the individual at the time the seizure started, the age they're at when they see us, how long they've had epilepsy, the degree of damage in those central structures, et cetera. These are the kinds of things we've been tracking for a long period of time. But I just want to give you a little bit of insight into some of the newer ways that we're looking at these questions that have allowed us to gain some, I think, more important understanding as to what's going on. And the way that we're trying to understand these problems now, is to clarify what's happening in the networks of the brain, memory networks. And I'll give you a little insight into what I mean by that. So here, again, is a kind of side view of the brain. And in blue, I've traced out this hippocampus, that really critical structure that we've been paying all of our attention to. We're just focusing in on that for 50 years, saying, how well is that working? That's going to tell us everything we know. But as a matter of fact, if we look and say, how is that hippocampus connected up with the rest of the brain? Here is a picture that just shows all of the white matter or highway tracks in the brain that are connected up with that region. And you see it actually is talking to a huge amount of the rest of the brain. And in fact, when it's talking to that huge amount of the rest of the brain, we have to understand, or imagine at least, that there's probably activity that's taking place in those other regions of brain. And we know from tests that we're running called functional MRI that we can actually even recreate these kinds of patterns in the brain to be able to understand how this new information is represented there. So clearly, it's not just this real estate that we have to be concerned about. Maybe we should start turning our attention to what's going on in the rest of the brain. And I'll just say that the reason, of course, we focused in on this hippocampus is because we know that that's a structure that if you're going to be going for surgery, that structure is very likely going to be removed. And so we want to think about what's the consequence of that removal, but we're now beginning to think maybe how it interacts with everything else in your brain is actually going to give us a little bit more information about that. So this panel at the right is a little cartoon that actually shows what's happened in functional MRI research on this kind of retrieving personal memories over the last 10, 15 years. And down here, we have that hippocampal or that medial temporal structure with the hippocampus in there. And when we're thinking or reliving these memories or thinking about them, that area of the brain is definitely very active, but so are these other areas of the brain very reliably in very, very many people. This kind of effect has actually been shown probably in about 100 studies by now. So we really do believe that this is forming some kind of a network that allows us to retrieve this information. So I'm just going to show you a tiny little bit of data to show you how we've started to try and use this information to better understand what's going on in memory in individuals with temporal lobe epilepsy. So one of my graduate students, Connie, a number of years back, decided to ask a very simple question. We know that these areas are all active, but what about the connections between those areas? How important are those for understanding what's going on with our memories? And so what she did was to say, let's just look at a very simple connection between this hippocampus and this one area in the middle of the brain called posterior cingulate, which seems to be an important hub region for this network. And what Connie was able to show, now I'm going to kind of orient you here. So down below, we have performance on a visual memory test, FACES. High scores mean you did better on the test. And on this, let me just do it this way. And on this axis, so we show how connected that hippocampus was, that region I'm showing in yellow, was to that posterior region of brain. And I think you can appreciate that there's a very strong correlation here, a very strong relationship. So the better connected up you are before surgery, the better your memory performance. So that's probably telling us that this connection is telling us something important about performance. It's relating in a very strong way to our standard clinical memory tests. But we thought the more important thing to know was, how is it actually going to tell us about prediction of what might happen after surgery? Can we tell about your memory outcome after surgery by looking at this? And so Connie was able to do this in two ways that we're currently following up in a few different studies. So first, she showed that the stronger the connection before surgery, which is again on this axis, the more you stood to lose after surgery. So this score, actually, the negative scores tell us that you lost points on that same test that you had done before surgery. So strong connection means you stood to lose more. And that's actually a relationship we absolutely predicted. We expected that to happen. Because again, if we're saying that's really good tissue, it's really doing a good job for memory, then taking away that connection is going to have some consequences for you. But what we didn't expect was the following, that in fact, the degree of connection on the other side, the side that wasn't operated, actually was protective. So here, the stronger the connection on the other side, the healthy side, the more preserved your memory was after surgery. So what does all of this tell us? It tells us that if we want to be able to predict what's going to be happening for an individual person following surgery, we need to look at the whole network, not just that one piece of real estate that might be subject to being removed in surgery, but how the rest of the brain compensates. And in fact, that's a question that I'm often asked by individuals thinking about surgery. Well, is the other side of my brain going to kind of take up the slack? And that's what we're trying to understand, how all of those different parts of brain work together, because each of these dots is an individual person. And so it's telling us that some people have more of that capacity than others. And we're also now studying how these networks may change after surgery. So we're doing some of the same kinds of scans after surgery to see what's happening there. And that may give us yet further pieces of the puzzle. So the last two things I want to tell you about is just a little bit about the current work that we're doing. And we're taking that kind of approach, but we're doing it in a larger sample of individuals and with some colleagues throughout the province of Ontario. So in Eplink, we have a surgical format in our program where the individuals who are going for surgery at Sick Kids, Toronto Western Hospital, and London Health Sciences Centre are getting very much the same kinds of investigations. So they're all getting some memory testing in their standard way. They're all getting some of this fMRI so we can look for all these connections. And they're all getting some other kinds of structural imaging to look at connections in other ways. And our hope is that we'll be able to take all of that information across these different individuals and be able to use some very fancy kinds of statistical techniques called machine learning and be able to produce better outcomes. We'll have a much better way of telling somebody when they come in for counseling for surgery, here's exactly what we can expect for you because we have all of this wonderful information ahead of time. And the last thing that I wanted to tell you about is something we're very excited. We're hoping to be able to launch in the next couple of months. We've been working in the background on this in Eplink for a little while. And this is called STREAM, or Strategies for Epilepsy and Memory. And what we're doing is we've put together a kind of distance delivered group educational program. So this means it's going to be facilitated by a neuropsychologist as well as an individual with lived experience. The program is informed by the best evidence we have about memory strategies. in addition to the kind of online group sessions, we also have some web-based vignettes and tips for people, and we're going to measure the impact on their memory performance, but also on how good they feel about their ability to use these strategies. And to the right, I've just put on the 8 different sessions, the kind of information that we're hoping to be able to cover. And as I said, we're starting our first focus group very soon. And once we get out the kinks, hopefully we'll be able to roll that out to the province in a much, hopefully in a way that will be of value to people. All right, so the very last thing I wanted to just say is, of course, this kind of clinical research takes a village. Here we simply have about a 3-year-old picture now from an older time when we were having a purple day at Toronto Western Hospital with a whole gaggle of neurologists and neurosurgeons and basic scientists and our team, et cetera, all of whom contribute to the kinds of research and clinical care we've been talking about. I just wanted to share with you one of my many amazing, wonderful students. This is Connie McCormick, whose work that I talked about. So I wanted to share that with you. And I also wanted to share with you that it takes a whole lot of years to come to where we have in our research to date. So I was able to dig up, this is me in the late 80s during my postdoc at the Montreal Neurologic Institute with Dr. Brenda Milner. And this is us a couple of years ago celebrating her 100th birthday. So it just tells you that we're keeping on. I don't promise to be around for 100 years doing this research, but hopefully we'll be able to tell a little bit more about memory in the years to come. So thanks for your attention. I'm more than happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Mary Pat. I think you probably will get a lot of questions, particularly about STREAM, but we'll hold those until our question and answer session. Our next presenter is going to be Wendy Morris. Wendy is a business owner and community volunteer here in Toronto, and she'll be sharing her story about living with epilepsy, about her struggles with memory, and her journey in overcoming these challenges. Wendy?
Let's just get you unmuted first, Wendy. So go ahead and unmute. There we go. There we go. Perfect. Thank you, Wendy.
Okay, sorry about that. Hi, I'm Wendy Morris, and I have been diagnosed with epilepsy since 2002. Well, I had my first seizure at 2001, but I wasn't fully diagnosed until 2002. I have tonic and focal unaware seizures. I take 2 different medications, gabapentin and Topamax. So now I almost forgot what medication I take. That's memory. I get seizures on and off, regular seizures, and I have been suffering with memory problems. I forget everything. So I had to find a way that works for me. So I was taught different strategies by Epilepsy Toronto, and I decided to incorporate them into my life. I use sticky notes everywhere in my apartment, on my door, on my front door, because I tend to forget everything when I walk out the door. I use it on my fridge. I use it basically every day. I also misplace things a lot. I forget my password quite a lot, which annoys my kids. And I misplace my banking information. So we have decided that I can only use 2 different sets of password, and any changes, one of the children has to know. I made folders for things, and if it's a bad week that I forget things, I start all over again. I know that don't make a lot of sense to people, but I do have bad weeks. My medication is in a blister package, so I can remember when I to take my medication. And in case I forget that a medication is missing, someone can look on my package and said, no, you haven't forgotten your medication. I also use alerts a lot. Alerts help me to live daily, every day. Every day, a lot's helped me to make it from day to day. I use a lot of apps on my phone. I use an app for my also on my epilepsy, but I use apps for appointments because again, I won't remember any of the appointments, and I have the app set for weekly, and then I have them set hourly right up to next to the appointment. I keep important documents all in the same place. I don't move anything from, I have to keep them at a certain place, and that's where I can remember where I am. It sort of builds into my brain that that's where I put my stuff. And then the last thing I would say that works really well for me is fingerprints. I use fingerprints on my banking stuff right now, so that makes it a lot easy to get on. I'm gonna say epilepsy has been a journey for me, and I won't say it was the best journey. It was really hard. It was hard on my family. It was hard on me. I had to go through the anger and the dislike of having life changes. I also lost friends along the way, but I feel like I gained better friends. I lost relationship, and that's been hard. My kids had to cope with so many different things. But as the bad side of epilepsy, there's also plus side for me. I'm able to find myself and look at myself in a different way and know that every single time that I fall, I get right back up and I do it all over again. And I really love the person that I am today. I would fight for epilepsy and I would stand up for Epilepsy Toronto because they have been there for me. And I might forget something a few minutes after I get up from here, but that's not going to make me have a bad day because I'm determined that every time I'm done, I'm going to get up. I'm my hard critic, but I love that I am able to stand up and fight again. That's basically it for me.
Okay, Wendy, thank you very much. And I'd like to say thanks to both of our presenters today. We're going to now start our question and answer session. Just a reminder that if you've got a question, you can submit it via chat at the bottom of your screen, or if you're participating through Zoom, and in the comment section if you are on Facebook Live. We'll do as best as we can to get to as many questions as we have time for. Let me just perhaps get started by asking Mary Pat, could you tell us a little bit more about the STREAM study and how it got put together and a little more about when it's going to start?
Sure. So it's been about 2 years, I think, that we have been meeting, and by we, I mean a group of individuals that include, as I said, neuropsychologists, as well as from both the pediatric side and the adult side, as well as other team members from Eplink. And we've also had a patient partner along the way, one of the individuals who went through our surgical program, so that we could keep it grounded in terms of what was going to make most sense for everyone. So we poured through a lot of different kinds of information about what are the best kinds of tips and strategies. I'll say, you know, a Post-it note everywhere is sometimes necessary, but if you lose the Post-it note, you're in trouble. So, but some of the other strategies that Wendy talked about are actually very key ones that we talk about, right? So some of the ways are, you know, trying to make information kind of more memorable in different ways for yourself. So you can use some kind of internal strategies, and then you can also use external strategies like the you know, voicemail on your phone or the reminders or things like that, the pill packs, etc. So the idea is not to fix anyone's memory, because we don't know that that's possible, right? We don't actually have the tools for, you know, replacing the kinds of cells that are important for being able to do memory at its highest, best level. But what we do know is that we have some strategies to be able to kind of do hacks, memory hacks or workarounds, or supports that enable people to not quite feel like they're, losing track of what's going on, to give them a little bit more confidence. And hopefully give them some strategies they can use. So we are just starting a focus group just to see how it's going to run, because it's going to run totally virtually. And that's going to be our first crack at trying to do this. So we'll do 1 or 2 focus groups, and then we'll feel hopefully that we've worked out all the kinks and get started sometime probably in the summertime with a full group. Usually a group is around 8 to 10 people, because that allows people to interact, share their own experiences, share their kind of strategies that they used last week, and see how things are going.
Okay, thank you, Mary. Pat, we have a specific question about how someone would get a neurological examination. Is that something that's available at different hospitals, or how do you go about it?
Sure. It's a great question. Unfortunately, psychology services, including neuropsychology evaluations, are not funded through the OHIP system. So unlike, being able to go to another doctor, et cetera, that doesn't happen. So the services are available in hospitals kind of around Ontario, but the specialty services for neuropsychology and epilepsy are really only available at the 3 surgical centers that we talked about: Sick Kids, Toronto Western, and in London. And then there are also some what we call district epilepsy centers that like in McMaster, for example, and Hamilton, that allow for those kinds of services. So unfortunately, the services are often restricted because of the funding that's available in the hospital. So for example, for our services, most of what we have to provide service for is for the surgical program. So that means that everybody going for surgery has to have an assessment with us. And we also track people after surgery between 8 and 12 months, so we can catch up and see how they're doing. And then that leaves a little bit of a slice of time for other people who aren't on the surgical track. And often that's a matter of saying, okay, what can we do that would be helpful for you in terms of, for example, maybe for school accommodations or something in the workplace, or somebody who's experiencing some rather dramatic change, and we might be able to find out what's going on. So that's basically how one gets there. And in our hospital, in the 3 centers, you really have to be referred by a doctor who's in our hospital in order to get the service.
Thank you, Mary Pat. Wendy, a question for you. People wonder how you deal with epilepsy related memory problems in your business. Is it a problem in your business?
No, not really. I have help though. I have help from family members. I really don't have a problem with that in the business right at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Mary Pat, do memory issues in epilepsy lead on to dementia later in life?
It's a really good question, and one that makes people fearful, I would have to say. The best information we have is that it isn't a specific risk factor for dementia in later life, okay? By that I mean, it's not the case that people who have seizures are more likely to develop one of the classic neurodegenerative disorders like Alzheimer's disease, for example. What seems to happen is that individuals essentially, have some memory difficulties, but then in general, they're kind of aging brain at pretty much the same rate as if they weren't having epilepsy. That's, however, I would say that that's characteristic of people with well-controlled epilepsy. If it's not well-controlled, then having particular types of seizure activity might cause more aggressive kind of deterioration. Again, not as a full-blown Alzheimer's disease or something like that, but something that, again, is very specific to those memory circuits that we know are being compromised already by the epilepsy.
Mary Pat, people are wondering whether the memory issues they have are epilepsy related or not. Is there some way to know what's related to the seizures and what's not related?
Yeah, as I said in my very earliest slide, it's hard to tease apart what is the seizure what is related to the underlying cause of the seizure, what is related to the drugs that you're taking, because we know those are having an effect too. And in fact, only one drug has been shown to have a very specific effect on verbal memory. That actually does, Wendy, happen to be Topamax.
Yep.
So we do know that one, and we know because when people go on it, their memory does change relative to when they were taking a different drug. So all of those things kind of together conspire to make memory poorer. And it's probably a combination of those things.
Okay, thank you. I think Dr. Paul Wang has a hand up. Paul, do you want to unmute? We can't hear.
Can you hear me?
Yes, now we
I'm
can hear you.
unmuted. Yeah, I want to comment on Dr. Mary Pat McAndrews' interrelationship between epilepsy and dementia. Andy Cole, who's director of the epilepsy program at Massachusetts General Hospital at Harvard, has done a small study with foramen ovale electrodes in patients with pre-dementia, even before they have been diagnosed to have Alzheimer's. And he found a higher than normal incidence of interictal spiking from inferior temporal structures studied with somewhat invasive foramen ovale electrodes. And he has only published it in abstract form at the American Epilepsy Society meeting. But this may be more than meets the eye. In other words, are there biomarkers for early onset of dementia even before our MOCA test can pick them up? Would a specific EEG targeting inferior temporal structures be more sensitive?
Okay.
So I'll leave
So
that as a question.
I can answer that question because I know that worked quite well. But I will give a very short answer because it's really a longer answer to that question. That was 2 patients that actually has been published and it's being followed up as well. This is the question of the second peak of seizure onset is in the 60s. So in fact, in later life, some individuals do in fact develop seizures. So that's the real question about whether or not his findings are related to whatever's going on in that late adult onset epilepsy, as opposed to individuals who've had epilepsy their whole lives and then developing dementia, which is, I think, the spirit of the first question. Those may be 2 very separate, very distinct kinds of things. And some of the work that's being done, including work I know very well at Johns Hopkins, is actually looking into that question, whether or not it's really a complete, even though you're seeing epilepsy, they're really for different reasons.
Wendy, you said you use sticky notes. Do you write lists? I can't get through a day without a list of what I've got that day.
I can't live life without a list. I have to.
Yeah, I tend to sit down the night before and organize the following day, and that's the only way I stay on track.
Yeah, I have to write a list, and still I put something on my door to remind me to put the list in my bag.
Okay. Mary Pat, what research has found about really the epilepsy medications? You mentioned Topamax. Are there any others that are seriously likely to cause memory problems?
So Topamax is the one that's been most identified as a single drug. In general, if you look at the literature, the drug effects are often the more you're taking, the more the hit will be in terms of all kinds of cognitive processing. So generally more slowed thinking, poor attention, as well as poor memory. But no other, to the best of my knowledge, no other single medication has kind of come out as having a unique effect on verbal memory. Interestingly, there's even a study from Germany showing this in fMRI, that people taking Topamax showed a different kind of activity pattern, wasn't as strong as individuals not taking other drugs. So far as we know, the more that you're taking, the more cloudy. Essentially might be all kinds of effects. I often tell my trainees when they start with me in the service that if they took the same medications that Wendy is taking, they would be on the floor. Now, Wendy's brain has accommodated and adjusted to all of these different medications, but for sure, if you take it as a naive person, you will not be able to think your way out of a paper bag for the next little while. So,
I do remember that. Wendy, you use apps on your phone and such. How did you learn to do that? I am not good at using smartphones. How did you get started with the apps?
My daughter and also Epilepsy Toronto. My counselor helped me through a lot of them.
Okay, now that's good.
Yeah.
That is something that Epilepsy Toronto could do then for people.
Yes.
Help get the
Yep.
app set up. I wonder if they'd help me. I think I could use some help. Mary Pat, people wonder, you said it's hard to get professional assessment of your memory capability. Is there any one way people could do it at home from a lay point of view?
yeah, that's a really good question. There's a lot of work that's being done right now, but largely in the aging part of the world rather than in the epilepsy. And we're starting to look at some of those kinds of things too. So some of my colleagues, for example, at Baycrest Hospital, have developed a very nice little, I'd say 25-minute test that's again based on really best practices and principles of psychology that you can do online. And it's called the Brain Health Assessment, but the actual company that fosters it is called Cognicity. And it has a couple of different kinds of measures. You can get a score. Unfortunately, the scores, the normative data that they have available is only for people aged, I think, 60 and above, because it's all geared towards aging, aging and looking for, early signs of dementia or cognitive impairment. I'm not aware of anything that's available in the general population. There are other kind of brain games that are out there. And they're of, I won't say of dubious quality, but you have to, buyer beware. And especially if it's coming for free, it's probably worth what you paid for it.
Maybe you'd input to us again about that thing you can get over the internet. It's from Baycrest, and what?
I'm just putting it into the chat.
Okay,
is the name of the program.
Fantastic.
But again, it will, if you're below 60, I don't think you can get a score. It won't tell you how you're doing, basically.
Not a problem for me.
Mac, you're not supposed to be self-serving in this role.
All right. Wendy, who was your counselor at Epilepsy Toronto? And is there counseling for people that live outside of urban Toronto? Maybe someone from Epilepsy Toronto could deal with that too.
Well, I have Rosie Smith, but there's other counselors there who deals with other people that's outside of Toronto also.
This is Mackenzie jumping in here. I can also say that there are some services available throughout Ontario. The best thing to do is call 1-866-EPILEPSY, and that will connect you to the epilepsy agency in your area, whoever's closest to you. So hopefully they can help you that way.
So that's 1-866-EPILEPSY.
Epilepsy. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Just a minute. My screen's gone off. Question. My daughter suffers from short-term memory loss. How can I help her remember more? I guess that would be Mary Pat.
Yeah, so again, I think some of the strategies that we talk about are, as I said, both kind of internal things that people can use, as well as external things. So what do I mean by internal things? So a lot of the information that we forget easily is information that we can't kind of tie into that, what we talked about as semantic memory. So the classic thing that I'll tell you about is names of people. You meet someone new, and 3 seconds later, you have no idea what their name is. And now you're terribly embarrassed because you can't ask them what their name is again, et cetera. Or you met them last week and you have no idea who they are, right? Because a name is a meaningless piece of information, right? The fact my name is Mary Pat is totally meaningless to you. So I remember working with an individual who'd had a stroke, who had a real trouble with learning names. And this is just a good illustration of what I mean by internal strategies. So I said, well, okay, well, sometimes people, when they use visualization, it really can help them. So I said, let's work with my initials, MP. So maybe you can think of me as a member of parliament standing in front of the House of Commons. Or maybe you can think of me as military police sitting astride a horse. And he came back the next week and he said, I made up my own visualization for you or comment for you. And I said, that's great, because if you do it yourself, it sticks even better. And he said, MP, malpractice. Which I said, that's great. You've got something to help you remember, but I hope you don't say it outside of the office because people will start to wonder. So using those kinds of strategies to make things make sense to you, to make them meaningful, allows you to hang on to it a little bit better. And that may work with your daughter as well. Certainly, one of the other things that we talk about a lot in psychology, we learned something called retrieval practice. So even the mere act of trying to retrieve information gets it cemented into memory a little bit better, gets it to consolidate a little bit better. So, I don't mean just rehearsing over and over and over again, because everybody's had that experience of looking up a phone number, you say it to yourself 3 times, you dial it, and then 2 minutes later, you've forgotten the phone number. But, trying to, give yourself some information. So if she's trying to learn something in school, then give a little bit of a cue and try and get that information back. So practicing retrieval actually allows it to sit with you. I used to say my strategy for college was I would write everything I knew about a course on 3 index cards for the final exam. Could only be on 3 index cards. And it didn't matter if I lost the index cards, just the mere fact of trying to do that actually helps you to remember the information better. So there are lots of strategies to be able to work with as well.
Okay, we have a lot more questions, but we have run out of time. I would just like to say that we appreciate everyone joining us here today, that the next webinar will be held on next Friday, March 19th, and it'll be a chance to meet the experts. So we have quite a good panel assembled to talk to you about epilepsy-related topics. We'd also join everyone to join us on the Purple Day celebration on Friday, March 26th, which will start a little earlier at 3:30. In addition, the organizers, and let me just mention the organizers, sessions were put together by Epilepsy Toronto's Mackenzie Muldoon and Jacqueline Nimick and Eplink's Rebecca Wolfley. Thanks to all 3 of those. Okay, they would like you to send us some feedback about this session. There will be a survey found at the link in the chat box, and the link will also be emailed out to you after the event. Okay, we're about to start our breakout groups, and maybe some of the questions can be referred to the breakout groups. We're no longer going to be broadcasting or recording after this point.